This is David Crosby. I'm with Keith Ferguson, and we're at his place of business here in Flowood, Mississippi. This is part of a series of interviews for the Wells Oral History Project. Keith, do I have your permission to conduct this interview?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Maybe the simplest place to start is to ask how you first encountered Wells Church.
The way I first encountered Wells Church was through the invitation of a friend back in, I believe it was probably 1978 or 79.
Mm-hmm. And what were the circumstances of that?
She was my girlfriend, and she invited me to come, and I decided to come, and I enjoyed going there and continue to go there until this day.
Had you been a churchgoer before that?
I was raised in the Baptist church,
Mm-hmm.
and had gone to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday nights, until I was probably about 13 or so. And after my parents divorced and I was living with my mother and I became in my teenage years, I slowly got away from going to the church.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a opportunity to get back in. I'd gotten away from church, but I hadn't gotten away from God. I'd continued to pursue things and have a spiritual contact and practice daily devotions and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a kind of existential revolt or anything?
No, not really. I mean, it was a normal
Mm-hmm.
childhood independence thing, and getting into the things that are more interesting than going to church.
Well, once you encountered Wells, what you say you enjoyed it. What particularly made you enjoy going to church at Wells?
I guess it was the
Being
fact
with your girlfriend, part of it.
that was definitely part of it. It didn't really matter what at that point what it was, but yeah, I enjoyed that part of it. But I believe what it was that it filled a need in me that I had grown up with, but had not been practicing or experiencing on a regular basis. So I developed friendships with people there, and it was really distinctive. I remember first hearing Keith speak, and I just I remember feeling this is a godly man, and I need to have his influence in my life. I need to be influenced by him. He just had a different spirit about him, one that I had not encountered with the clergy before. It was a spirit of humility and grace, which was different from what I'd grown up with, and so that was very inviting.
Mm-hmm.
Wells at that time was somewhat unique in that it was a place that you could go to in your blue jeans, and that was not the case at all churches back then. This day and age, it seems to be a lot more common, but back then that was a unique experience for me as well.
It's interesting how many people have mentioned that. The must have been something about the informality of that appealed to people.
I think it was. I think it just seemed real.
Mm-hmm.
It made church more real, and it was more about the message than show, being dressed up or whatever.
Yeah.
Not to put down anything else I'd ever been to. It's just a different style.
Mm-hmm. This feeling you got from Keith, was that primarily through his preaching or other things?
Well, I would say primarily through his preaching. I didn't have a lot of personal relationship with him back then, and so it was really more through his preaching and leadership through that way.
Mm-hmm. So. And how old were you then?
I would have been about 19 then, 18 or 19.
So your adolescent years were not prolonged particularly.
Right. Well, true.
Yeah. Other than going to services at Wells Church, did you then become involved in other aspects of the church life?
I did. I became involved with some of the things that we were doing, which were involved with. I'm trying to remember, and it's been so long, it's hard to remember a lot of this, but we were involved with, seems like kids from the children's home or some group of kids that we were kind of involved with, and that we were doing some things with there. And so that was a little different because that was something I chose to be a part of rather than previously where I'd been made to be a part of a Sunday school class mm-hmm. or RAs or whatever it was. But that was that was one of the things early on that I do remember. And then eventually, not sure if I can remember the dates of this, but probably a couple of years after that, one of the things we got involved with was the community nursing home. Mm-hmm. And there was a group of us. Jim Young was one of the people involved in that, and Michelle, his now his wife, and it was a number of us got involved with going to community nursing home on Monday nights and playing dominoes. And we did that for probably 10 years or more. And through that, strengthened and developed better relationships with those people, but also developed some real significant friendships with some of the residents at the home. And one in particular was Mr. Otto Carwile, and he became my domino partner. And we had a great friendship. So.
And what was the point of going to play dominoes with senior citizens?
You know, the point of it, I guess, was that we was trying to do something that was lifting their spirits. And it was a chance to fellowship with other people and doing some positive things. And for me personally, it was one of the tools I used to try to do something positive, but also avoid some negative things. So I knew that if I was down there with them on Mondays, that I wouldn't be doing some of the things that I would have done otherwise. And so it became a two-edged sword like that.
Not racing motorcycles on Monday.
Well, that was before my motorcycle time. But frankly, it was a time when I would take off from drinking because I knew, okay, well, I wasn't going to be drinking and going to the nursing home, and so it was a night I set aside for that, which was pretty good.
So you were a regular drinker then?
I was. It was the 70s, and and I'd been drinking for a while and smoking pot and doing a lot of different things like that, and it increasingly became a habit and eventually became a problem. So recognizing part of that as a problem, that was part of a solution to temper that, I guess you would say.
It's interesting. So that engaging with this group of elders in a nursing home was a corrective to a problem that you felt you had or were beginning to have in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was, in addition to my really good friend and domino partner, Otto Carwile, there was also a guy there by the name of Sammy Merritt. And Sammy was an interesting character. He'd been homeless most of his life, and an alcoholic, and he had actually lost one of his legs because he had been passed out sleeping on a railroad track, and a railroad car ran over it and he lost his leg. And Sammy was, Lord, he must have been 75 or so at that time, but he'd spent a lifetime as an alcoholic, but he had given it up by the time I'd met him, and so I think it was all designed by God to work in my life and theirs too, I guess.
And did that lead you further along a road to recovery, or?
It was one of the pieces of the puzzle. There were a lot of pieces of that puzzle that was shaped by the people of Wells Church and the other people that we became involved with as a result. And eventually there became a time when it became clear to me that drinking was a problem, and that it was no longer an option for me. And it was made crystal clear to me that that was not going to be a good end, and if I continued on the way I'd been.
Mm-hmm.
There's a much longer story in that. I'm not sure how far you want to go with that, but the quick version of that is that there had been a man by the name of Kim Ingram, and he was an acquaintance that I had befriended and would drink and smoke pot with, and he wasn't a part of the church, but when he got into some legal problems, he got busted, and so he got arrested and had to do some time. Well, when he got arrested, I reached out to him to just see if there's anything I could do to help him, just as a friend, and he had told me that he would really like to have a Thompson Chain Reference Bible, which I thought was an odd request based on our relationship. Excuse me. But I was grateful to fulfill that need, and I got that, and felt it's an opportunity for me to kind of minister to him or whatever, and so I did that, and he spent a few years up in Parchment, and through that period of time, he became a committed Christian and became committed to a new lifestyle. And when he got out, he made it clear he was going to shop. He would visit our church, but he was going to shop around because he really wanted to be wherever he felt God wanted him to be plugged in. And so he came to our church, and he immediately became involved and planted there, and was involved with our softball team and a lot of other activities that we were doing. And so he was on the right path. And as my drinking had gotten worse, and I felt God was dealing with me and trying to give me a message that I need to give that up, I had one night of intense soul searching, and I had 2 dreams where I saw my life go before me. And so after each of these, I had long periods of prayer and talked to God and asked him, well, if he wanted me to give up drinking, I'd certainly be willing to do it, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't bargaining without reason. And so I asked him to make and give me a clear and unmistakable sign that it was he that was speaking with me. And at 7 o'clock that morning, I woke up by the phone ringing, and when I answered it, the voice on the other end says, "Keith, this is Keith." And I knew immediately it was Keith Tonkel. Not that I didn't have a relationship with Keith Tonkel like I do today. That would be a normal thing. So I knew when he called me that whatever he was, I really assumed he was going to tell me, well, hey babe, this is odd, but I need to just tell you that God gave me a message and wanted me to tell you that you need to stop drinking or something. But what he told me instead was, Keith, this is Keith. I've got some bad news. He says, Kim was found dead in his house this morning. And it became immediately clear to me that was my sign, and that was a message from God, because Kim was found dead, and he was 36 years old, and even after autopsy, they absolutely had no reason for his death. So that's been one of the things that's anchored me to Wells Church. Is God has used a lot of people in that place, in addition to Keith and his strong leadership, to bring about right choices and healing in my life.
It's very interesting. So, did you take some immediate steps to deal with this new perception?
I took an immediate step in my mind. I said, okay, I surrender. And whatever it is you want me to do, I'll do it, which is what I told him the night before. And I didn't know what that was, but I just went through the process and tried to make right decisions. The first thing was that immediately people were gathering over at my house because of the news of this person passing. People were stressed out and concerned, and first thing they wanted to do is smoke a joint. And I just said, no, I can't do that. I just, and I was scared. had some sense that if I smoked that joint, lightning would strike me dead. Not that I necessarily believe in a vengeful God, but that it was that clear to me, and that strong of a message. I hadn't yet told anybody about that message either. But it was interesting because we had Kim's funeral, and it was it was a time of people sharing things, and I shared some things. I took excerpts from letters where Kim had sent to me while he was in prison, and it basically read like a witnessing tool somewhat, is just talking about what God was doing in his life and how he had made the decision he wasn't going to be doing any drugs and alcohol and all that stuff when he got out, and his primary aim was going to live for God. Well, I shared that with our congregation, and at the funeral, at the graveside, after the graveside service was done and we was walking away, as we were walking away, we looked up in the sky, and there was a perfect cross up in the sky, made with something like you would think of jet streams.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing, there was no jet streams to be found, no jets to be found in there. But a couple of days after that service, I got a call from a lady that was there at Wells Church, that was involved with Wells Church, by the name of Margie, and she just reached out to me. I'd never spoken to her before. I'd heard her speak in the church, but she was a very kind and sweet-spirited lady, and she reached out to me, and she just called me on the phone. She said, I just wanted to call and see, do you want to talk? Is it, because she knew I was hurting and that this person had been very close to me. And it was kind of interesting because her sweetness and caring attitude melted my defenses and just was inviting, and so I was able to talk with her, and she was the first person I relayed this experience to. And afterwards, she listened very patiently and all, but afterwards she just asked me, she said, well, do you think you have a drinking problem? And for the first time in my life, I was able to acknowledge, not just to myself, but actually to another person, yes, I do. And she asked me, she told me that she had friends that had similar problems, but they had found a way that they were now able to not drink and have better lives, and asked me if I would be interested in talking with any of those people. And
that sounds like that would be a little scary.
It was very scary, and it was not really something that I necessarily wanted to do, but I kind of felt the hand of God on that as well. And so I was a little bit scared to push that away. So I accepted her offer on that and said, yes, I will do. And so basically, she ended up taking me to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was where I got my start in a design for a living for how to live without drinking alcohol.
Mm-hmm. And was that AA group associated with Wells Church, or was it just?
No. Alcoholics Anonymous is not associated with any group, denomination, or politics or organization. So it was not associated with them at all.
But it was a woman from Wells who brought you to AA.
It was a woman from Wells who at that time did not herself acknowledge to have a problem with alcohol as it related to herself, but she was a family member who she had people in her life that were alcoholics, and so she was practicing the program of Al-Anon, and so that was the way she shared the message of that program with me.
Were you married at this point? Or?
I was not. That was in 1988, and I did not get married until about 6 years later. So.
And what kind of work were you doing?
I was working right here. I was working with my dad. He had started a advertising specialty company back in 1967, and I joined him in 1978. And so I had been at it for about 10 years at that time, basically in sales.
Mm-hmm. Did recovery then become something that became an important part of your outreach as well as your own method for living?
Well, recovery definitely became an important part of my living. It had to become number one of how I was going to live, and so getting sober initially is very hard. Some people go through treatment centers and have the benefit of closed environments and structured settings and that kind of thing, and I never did do that. I just started going to Alcoholics Anonymous and started going to meetings on probably a daily basis, or at least 4 or 5 times a week. But I still maintain my affiliation with the church. I didn't sacrifice one for the other. It was, for me, it worked hand in hand. Some people who don't have an experience with God sometimes get into Alcoholics Anonymous and start the process of having a relationship with a spiritual being, and but fortunately for me, I had all that in place. It's and so for me it worked hand in hand. One of the things that was happening at Wells Church at that time was there was a group of people who were in recovery, who were attending meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they had started a prayer group, and it was called the James Club. And basically what we would do is we would meet during the Sunday school hour and get together and pray for one another and pray for other people, taking the admonition from the book of James, getting together and praying for one another that you would be healed. And so that was an intensive, important part of my recovery. And that group continued for quite a while. It was pretty much run by one of our members who had a real profound spiritual experience and who had just found God and Christ and who would lead most of our prayers. But eventually he moved away, and so the group kind of struggled a little bit, and then we kind of changed formats and started doing Bible studies and different things along those natures, and that group grew to a pretty significant number of people that would come, somewhere in the 20 to 30 people group. We used to meet in the old scout hut, which was there for a long, long time. The walls were rotted out of the bottom of it and had old movie theater seats in there, and it had been a storage room for the church for quite a while. But anyway, our group grew and did well, and a lot of people in the recovery community would come. They heard about Wells as a church and how inviting it was and open to whomsoever's, and so they would be attracted to that, and then they came for the James Club. And so we went through several iterations there of how we would do that. We had different people sometime that would lead the class, and eventually the leaders would move on, and so the class would kind of falter. And it did that had several cycles of that, and then eventually it went for a while and it wasn't there at all anymore. And I'm not really sure how many years it was, but probably at least 5 or something. But when we were having our annual planning meeting, I talked to the planning committee, and I talked to them about trying to revive the James Club group, and they were all supportive of it. And so we started that again, and we have a lot of people in recovery at Wells, and so there was a number who were very interested in doing that, and so we started that up again, but we tried to learn from our past and make it so that it would be something that would run itself without leadership or without one particular leader. And so basically we really modeled it after the way that AA is modeled, in that there are no leaders, there's only trusted servants, and that we would pick a schedule of readings, which we started with the Life Recovery Bible. It's put out by Tyndall. In that Bible they have several devotional series, and those series may take you 12 weeks, or they may take you a year, just depending. They had topical studies and character studies, but it was a Bible that was all tied into recovery principles. And so we took that as our guide and scheduled, so we knew at any particular time where we were supposed to be. So you could be in the class this month and be there every week, and you'd be with us, but you could be gone for a month, and you could know where we would be plugged in. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we also did is that we seeded it with some money, and we bought a lot of Bibles, and we would hand out Bibles to everybody that ever came to the class. And so that's a practice that we still do, and we've probably given away thousands and thousands of Life Recovery Bibles. But that became a pretty good model for us to run that class, and that class started meeting in part of the old parsonage, which has been converted to some classrooms, and we soon outgrew that, and we started looking at the need to have more space. So we started looking at that, and everything in the church goes slow, committees and all that. But we started looking at that, and some of the leaders in the church, a lot of the leaders in the church have usually been people in recovery. Not all of them for certain, but strong leadership with people who are recovering. Anyway, so we got to looking. We were looking at putting one of these modular buildings out there, and then we just got figuring out we just need to build a building. And Earl Jones was I believe probably the chairman of the trustees, or either the board chair at the time, and Earl had been instrumental in starting Harbor House at a recovery center. But Earl was a member there, and he was real instrumental in helping us get a building built. And so we got that building built that became the James Club room, which has become the most used classroom in the church.
Mm-hmm.
We use it as a Sunday school class for people in recovery as the James Club on Sunday, but it's also been opened up to for AA meetings. There's Georgetown group meets there, and then there's a NA group meets there, and I think both of those meet there twice a week. So it's the most used building in the church.
What's a Georgetown group?
Georgetown is an AA group. AA groups generally have names to identify them by, but they'd been meeting at another church for a long time and had lost their meeting space, and so they were looking for a place, and so we had built this building, so it became their home group. So it's worked out well.
Well, it sounds like you kind of were forced to take on a leadership role in reviving the James Club, if not before that.
No, I wasn't forced. It was my pleasure to be able to be a part of that. I just felt that there was a need for that, and it had been something that had helped me in the past, and it's something I knew that could help other people. And I don't know, it was just one of those things that just kind of jumped in my brain when we were sitting there one day, and I said, well, hey, why don't we do this? And they said, okay, do it. And I said, okay. And so we did.
You mentioned the planning committee and the board and how the things go slow at the church. I'm not familiar with Wells and the way it's organized and how it operates, but it sounds like you have to get an awful lot of people to agree to do something, whatever it might be. Is almost like a consensus kind of building process to get things done. Has that been your experience? Or?
It has. Wells has been considered a classic example of organized chaos. Wells is unique, and this was something I had never really, in the Baptist church, I was a child, and we would have business meetings on Wednesday nights, so the older people would vote and that kind of thing. But so this was the first time I'd ever really been a part of and had any ownership of being a decision maker in the church but Wells, as I understand it, and we're Methodist in name, and I never really knew anything about United Methodists. I just knew Keith Tonkel, and I knew I liked that and liked him, but don't understand even today all the politics and the structure of the church. But what I do know is that most churches do not have as broad base committees as we do at Wells. Wells, because of its desire to be inclusive, has large committees. The administrative, the I believe it's called the Administrative Council, the Council on Ministries, is a large group, and it decides the things that the church is going to be involved with, and then the administrative board is the organization responsible for funding it and making those decisions. And both of them, as I understand, are much larger than you would find in a typical United Methodist church. And because of Keith's leadership and his need for everybody to be happy, and so many of the things that we've done have been based on everybody feeling good about moving forward. And if there's strong opposition to not doing something, we've held off or backed up and looked at it differently. So, but yeah, it's interesting, and it's, as a business owner who makes his own decisions and changes courses at any given time, it's quite challenging when you're dealing with a group of people, and some of them who are extremely gifted business people, and some that are not at all gifted in that area, but all have equal voice and vote.
I notice you have some decorations here in your office that deal with Wellsfest. And is that an actual quilt? A photo of a quilt? Or?
That is a photo of the quilt. That is the first 20 years of designs that we created for Wellsfest.
Uh-huh.
And that quilt became our signature piece that we auctioned off in our live auction at Wellsfest. And that quilt raised $5,000.
Wow.
And and I'm glad the people that won it, which was John and Marguerite Garner, I'm so thankful that they won it, because I was also bidding on it. and I got up to about $4,950, and I'm glad they won it, because everybody wanted it for the same reason. Everybody wanted to make sure that they had it. They was going to either give it to Keith or give it to the church. Mm-hmm. And so the Garners won it. They're very generous people, and so it became framed, and then they started to bring it to the church, and realized, well, oh my goodness, the frame is bigger than the door. So the quilt ended up at Jackson Medical Mall, and it's hanging over there to this day. And since then, we've had 10 other Wellsfests. And so all those designs are now hanging in frame prints beside it.
Do you know who made the quilt?
I believe that some of the people in the church took the designs and actually did their own quilting. Mm-hmm. Like, everybody took a piece and quilted it and then brought it back, and I'm not sure who put it all together, but it was a church-wide effort there.
It's a traditional form. They call it an album quilt.
Uh-huh.
A lot of quilters down in Claiborne County, where I'm familiar with, will take the events of a given period or in their own lives or whatever, and they'll make a panel like that and put it together with the stripping.
I've been looking to get another one done since I moved to this new location, and I have most all of those shirts. And I've been looking at getting another one made where I could display all those.
Did you do the design work for these?
The design work, I took over the design work, and I can't remember exactly the year, but I think it was probably after about the 5th year. So I think we've done about 25 of the designs. That was, and that's the hardest thing we do every year because I'm such a critic and a perfectionist, and I'm the guy selling the T-shirts. So I'm producing them for my company. I'm selling them at the church, and I have this really critical eye for my own self and my own ego that I want it to really look great. And so we've been fortunate. We've had a lot of good ones, and we always have a lot of support for that, and people like them. So
I see you also have a collage of photographs from Wellsfest.
Right.
And
that was another item that was put together. That was just several years back, but it became an auction item, and I was the winning bidder on that item. So.
Well, tell me how you became involved with Wellsfest to begin with.
Okay. That's another interesting story.
Okay.
The Wellsfest was an idea that Malcolm White came up with. Well, Malcolm had been married by Keith, and he tried to pay him. And Keith is his practice doesn't accept money for weddings or funerals or any of that. So Malcolm, to hear him tell the story, which this is on our church website too, when we received an award from the Governor's Award of Excellence in Arts, Malcolm's dad told him that he had to figure a way to pay him back. And so Malcolm came up. Malcolm was a promoter. He had already started doing the St. Patty's Day parade, and Malcolm came up with the idea that we would do a festival, and at the time we were going through a building project for the church, renovating it, and so Malcolm came up with the idea that we throw this festival, and that we get the money from that and help raise money for the building fund. So somebody came around during the Sunday school class one day and said, hey, we're getting ready to do this music festival thing and raise a little money for the church. Does anybody want to be involved with that? And I was in Keith Tonkel's Sunday school class, and he looked dead straight at me. He says, hey, babe, I think that'd be something you'd be good at. Why don't you do that? Okay. So I thought it'd be pretty cool anyway, because it was a chance to meet some of the other people in the church, and Malcolm was such a cool dude. Everybody wanted to know Malcolm, and I was thinking, wow, it'd be good to know Malcolm for my business. He's a promoter, and so anyway, so that became the start of my involvement with Wellsfest. I was one of the first guys to start that, and so it was really interesting because our first meeting was at some local restaurant, and I'll say restaurant/pub, and we all got together, and I said, well, this is pretty cool. I never knew church work could be so much fun. And so we got together, and we ordered food, and somebody ordered a beer, and I'm like, really? You can order beer talking, and this is when I was still drinking, and so I was like, yeah, I think I like this place. This is pretty cool. And so we had great times organizing that first Wellsfest, and got to know some of the great people in the church, the Bruce Reynolds, the Jim Young, the Paul Kenzaneri. Paul had a T-shirt shop. He had the first T-shirt shop, I think, in Mississippi. And he was the one responsible for the logos and the T-shirts for the first 5 years or so. But got to meet a lot of good people and really became anchored in the church through Wellsfest because I was really a part of it.
Uh-huh. Well, it's interesting that you emphasize the meeting in a pub because Wellsfest has this reputation for being an alcohol-free festival. How did that come about?
Craziest thing. It was just that was it. That was part of it from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the things that was going to set it apart. Oh, it's an alcohol and drug-free festival, and okay, well that's good. And so it's interesting because I don't think any of those other guys had a problem at the time with alcohol but I did. It wasn't as bad as it became, but it was just really an interesting thing. One of the funny things about that is that so we're doing the festival. We get to the festival day. Well, we had to have a refrigerated truck to bring in the hot dogs and hamburgers and things that we were going to cook. Well, Malcolm had a friend that owned a beer company or something because he had Howlin' Mouse. I believe he had Howlin' Mouse back then, and so anyway. Well, no, he didn't have Howlin' Mouse back then, but he was running several restaurants. But anyway, some beer distributor loaned us a truck, so we used that as our refrigerator truck. But we had to paper it up so that you couldn't see the slits or jacks or whatever. I can't even remember, some off-brand beer it seems like on there. But yeah, it was. I'm not sure what the word is, but it was kind of interesting doing that.
Well, there's a kind of double irony there.
Yeah.
Covering up logos. Kind of against the grain of your profession.
Oh, yeah. It was funny. It was funny.
Well, it's kind of amazing to me that it became this occasion for raising money for other projects, other groups, other people, not just Wells Church itself.
Yeah, it was. That's Keith Tonkel.
Yeah.
I mean, let's do something for somebody else, and I'm, and it's good, and it's been the thing it's been one of the things that's most bonded people together in that church, I believe, because you really get to working with things, and that's become a very well-oiled machine now, and they have committees and structure and all that stuff, and back then it was 5 to 8, 9 guys and 1 or 2 girls that got together, and we put it all together and made all the decisions pretty much. But now it's very organized, and they go through and do things well and pick the beneficiary every year, and it's just gotten better and better and better. And
you continue to be involved in it.
I continue to be involved. This is our project. So we develop the logo, and we print up the swag, the T-shirts, the hats, the bags, the buttons, and whatever else that we think that we can sell. And it's something I'm very proud to be a part of, and it's very dear to my heart, and I'm very committed to it. And because Wellsfest anchored me to Wells, and Wells has been the anchor in my life and my soul to bring about the rest of the blessings in my life.
Well, Wells is well known for its policy of inclusion, everyone welcome all the time. And I understand that has led to some friction occasionally, whether it had to do with racial inclusion or economic class inclusion, gender preference inclusion. What's your take on all that?
I think it's our greatest strength and our biggest liability. It's the thing. It's the thing that the open door is the thing that made me feel welcome there. Because I knew whatever it was, it didn't matter. I was welcome. And there was time I'd be out partying on Saturday night till 4 o'clock in the morning, but I'd show up for church at 11 o'clock, and I know I was smelling like alcohol, and maybe even still had a buzz going, but nobody ever put me down about that or asked me to leave about that. It's, so it's been a very welcoming place, and that's I think that's the spirit that makes it work for people.
And what's the liability side of the equation?
Wow. The liability side is that I think what happens is when we're inclusive and we bring people whose sins are different than ours, it gets tough to accept sometimes. I think the important thing, I believe that the church should be open to anybody and everybody without exception. I think that's the way Jesus would do. I don't think Jesus would say, we invite you and we welcome you, and whatever it is that's your particular thing, it's okay. He would say, go and sin no more.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't say, well, come on and it's okay and we don't ever expect you to change. I think sometimes we get to a place where we want more than acceptance, and we want people to embrace our lifestyles or our ideas or whatever. Frankly, I need to be challenged to change. I don't need to be coddled and told that I'm okay and I don't need to change. I want to be challenged. I can't tell you to say, you should do this like me, because this is just what this is my preference for right now.
So acceptance can step over into, did you use the word embracing? Things that you personally feel don't lead to the right direction, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, Keith.
Yeah, I'm trying to. this is obviously a very challenging thing with a lot of people. I mean, because we want to accept people and we want to love people, and I think the key is if I can be myself and understand that I'm accepted regardless of my lifestyle and regardless of my habits and regardless of whatever I do right or wrong. That's one thing. If I take it on as I have an agenda and it's important to me for you to embrace what I'm doing as being okay, I think that's a problem. If I'm a gambler, I want to feel the freedom to come and understand that you accept me even though I'm a gambler or whatever I may be doing. But I don't feel like it would be right for me to come and say, I'm a gambler, but it's okay for all y'all to be gamblers too, and y'all we really should not treat this as a sin. Gambling's really not a sin, and some people it may not be, you know. The challenge comes is, again, when we all look at each other's sin, because, you know, that preacher may be leaning over that pulpit and saying, y'all need to stop that drinking and smoking and gambling. But, you know, he's got 100 pounds laying over the pulpit. Well, his thing is gluttony. Well, the Bible says you shouldn't be gluttonous either. So it's easy to point at other people's sins, you know, but he shouldn't be saying, y'all should all be fat like me, and it's okay to be fat because I'm fat. We need to be challenged. It's not just because we want to be okay and be accepted, don't mean that we're right. And that's very challenging right now, because a lot of the outside interests and outside social issues, people are wanting to make outside social issues of doctrine in the church. And there's either a right and wrong or there's not. Now, what's right for me may not be right for you. One of the things that I learned a long time ago, and that I try to practice, I learned from a friend there at Wells Church, Bruce Reynolds. And one thing he says, you know, you got to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And frankly, I got a lot more work to do on cleaning my side of the street than trying to clean up everybody else's. But it don't always keep me away from telling you where you need to sweep. So.
Well, it's almost a kind of microcosm of the whole society in that sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most organizations try to keep that kind of thing at bay, in a sense, and I mean, it's we self-select our social milieu, and when you start rubbing up against some of the things that you're uncomfortable with, it can be a real challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just like me. Drinking had become a problem for me, and drinking was not a good idea for me. But drinking may not be a problem for you or anybody else, but it is for me, and so I need to make sure I'm working that out and doing with that what God wants me to do.
But if somebody makes their living cheating other people, they're welcome at church, but their cheating isn't. Something like that.
Love the sin, love the sinner, not the sin. Mm-hmm. And some people, we're all dealing with different sins, but ain't none of us without it. So.
Well, I've taken you past your hour that I promised, and I know it's after quitting time, I guess. So.
You own your own business. It's a little different schedule, so I don't quit a lot, but I'm welcome anything you want to know. I'd be glad to.
Let me just.
Let me bring up. Well,
sure. Yeah, I was just going to say what haven't I asked you that I should?
Well, I was looking over here behind you, and I was looking at this photograph on the wall right there to the right dead center here, and all these Mexican children.
Oh yeah.
And that's something that has impacted my life significantly, and that's come out of Wells Church. That photo of those 25 children or so was taken down in Tlalamic, Mexico, probably about 10 years ago. That's something we would do annual trips to, and we started going down there and doing different things, helping clean up the church, paint the church, and building a clinic and doing dental work, and it's my wife got an anchoring to go, and I was like, I don't really want to do that, and I said, I don't really know anything to do. And so anyway, but she went down there. She had a pretty profound experience. She wasn't really crazy about it. It was the conditions are very primitive and rural, and she was not expecting that. And I'd not gone because I was too busy, because I've got a business to run and all that. Anyway, somewhere along the line, I had one of my motorcycle accidents. I'd broken a leg and I was set up for a couple months anyway. But I eventually went down there. About a year or two later, I went down there, and that's when I met all those kids. Mm-hmm. And it just it really made an impact on my life. And that picture to the left there of that young lady, that's one of the children I met down there. Her name is Jessica. And Jessica, she was about 8 or 9 years old at the time, was just the neatest little kid, and jumping around and goofy and smiling and laughing. And anyway, I immediately felt a kinship with her. And she had black teeth at the time. I don't think she'd ever seen a dentist. And so I convinced her over a couple of days to go see the dentist. And they brushed her teeth and cleaned her teeth and got them all bright and white and shiny, and it was just a neat thing. But we continued to go down there year after year. We did it for quite a few years, and even went down there one year, and I had my best friend Harold DeKay, who's also a member there at the church, had to push me in a wheelchair because I was recovering from a broken leg from a motorcycle accident. But that young lady, Jessica, has become my daughter. Mm. And she's 12 days younger than my own daughter. I have one daughter, and Jamie. And so when I was down there, she kind of felt a need of missing my daughter. And so anyway, but we just continued to develop a relationship, even though she didn't speak a bit of English for years and years. But I'm now sending her to college down there, and she's in her third year of college. She learns English, and she's become my daughter, and so that's been a great thing in Wells Church too.
So what was the church's idea in setting up this program?
Of going to Mexico?
Going to Mexico, yeah.
Well, it's part of Volunteers in Mission, which is a bigger part of the Methodist Church. VIM, and Robert Sharp down on the coast had headed that up, and a couple of our people had gone, and I think a couple of the doctors or whatever, and then they brought that program, they suggested it to the church, and just our church got really involved in wanting to do that, and so we started doing it, and a lot of us came to love those people. I mean, they're not just people we've gone down there and done stuff for, and you walk away and leave them, and a lot of those people, there's dozens of them we could call names and tell you all about them, and we've seen their children grow up and all that kind of stuff, and so it's not that we in the Methodist Church you don't go do a whole lot of evangelism of handing out tracts and all that kind of stuff, but you go and meet human need, and they see the love of Christ through meeting human need. One of the things we did, there's a little family that was living in dire conditions, even compared to all the other dire conditions down there. I mean, they were living in a little lean-to kind of a hut that was put together with little boards and tent material and paper and all this stuff, and there was like 5 or 6 kids living in this thing. It's probably 8 by 10, and they cooked on a little stone that was in the middle of this thing, and had one light bulb hanging down. That was their light in there. But that family was in just dire conditions, and we went up there and cleaned it out a little bit and gave them some blow-up mattresses and stuff like that, and it made a real impact on people, and we made a commitment to. We was going to try to help build them a house. And so I'm a photographer, amateur, and so I'd taken some pictures and things, and I came back and I blew those up, and I stood up in that church, and I told them about this family, and I showed them the pictures, and I told them that we would like to, we wanted to try to do something to raise, to build them a house. And we told them we thought we might need about $1,500 to do that. And within 10 days, they'd given us over $5,000. So we went back and we built a house for those people, a concrete structure house that is a place that we go to each year and go up there and remember they had a place on top of a hill that overlooked the whole village, which was interesting and beautiful, and so that's one of the things that made a significant impact on a lot of us there. So
I see.
Yeah.
I understand the church was involved in Katrina relief as well. Do you familiar with that?
Yeah, we had a strong commitment to that, and we kind of waited because we knew it was a marathon and not a sprint, and there were a lot of people sprinting, and that was great that they were down there helping. But we went down after a few months, and there were still tons and tons of things to do, and so we got involved in a little community called Pearlington down there. And Keith, of course, grew up in Bay St. Louis, which is right down from Pearlington, and so. But we got involved. I went on a couple of those trips, and one where we gutted a mobile home that had not been in since Katrina. It had been 4 or 5 months. They had not even opened the door. They'd been staying behind it. But anyway, we went in and basically ended up gutting the whole trailer down to replacing the studs and 2x4s and all that, and rebuilt that house. And it was. After it was rebuilt, it was really considered more of a permanent home. It was better than it had been before. But there were some people who were very committed to that project, and that went week after week after week and did that. And so that was a thing that our church was, I think, brought our church together too.
So service to others is an underlying theme a lot of this at the church.
Absolutely. It's meeting human need, and that leadership has come from Keith Tonkel, and many others have picked it up and are now leaders in that, and do lots and lots of things. And so the church is very committed to helping people, and that's one of the reasons we've stayed in the community. It's a ministry to the community, and others may have talked a lot about that, but it's we meet a lot of human need there too. We have the whole food pantry thing on Tuesdays, and distribute a lot of food there. And Wells has always been involved with the community. Wells Operation Shoestring started out of Wells years and years ago, and so it's always been a church that's been committed to people, and I think that's a lot of the draw of that church for a lot of people. It's really doing things, and it's giving people an opportunity to be a part where they can have a part.
Well, Keith, I certainly appreciate your taking the time to cooperate with this Wells effort and
Sure.
to share your insights into what it is that makes Wells a special place.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.